So you don't think your stepfather had anything to do with it?
Oh, I know he didn't.
What do you think happened that night?
I think it was an accident.
Do you still search for answers, wanting to know exactly the truth?
I have my answers. I don't spend any time actually thinking about that.
Every great Hollywood story carries shadows underneath the spotlight, and few shadows run as deep or linger as long as the one cast over the death of Natalie Wood. She was one of the most gifted actresses of her generation, a child star turned Oscar-nominated icon who captivated audiences for 4 decades. Then, on a cold November night in 1981, she vanished from the deck of a yacht anchored off California's Catalina Island and was found dead the following morning. 44 years later, the case remains officially unresolved, and the 2 daughters she left behind are still navigating life in her extraordinary shadow. The star who lit up Hollywood before the darkness came. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20, 1938, in San Francisco, Natalie Wood entered the world as the daughter of Russian immigrant parents who had fled the upheaval of the Russian Civil War and rebuilt their lives in California. Her mother, Maria, was an ambitious woman who channeled her own unfulfilled dreams of stardom directly into her second child. From almost the moment Natalie could walk, Maria was taking her to movie houses, studying the faces of child performers on screen, and engineering opportunities for her daughter to be noticed. The strategy worked faster than even Maria could have anticipated. At the age of 4, young Natasha was already appearing in small film roles. By the time she was 7, she caught the eye of director Irving Pichel, who cast her in Tomorrow is Forever, alongside Claudette Colbert and Orson Welles. The family relocated from Santa Rosa to Los Angeles, where studio executives at RKO gave her the stage name Wood, after director Sam Wood. 1 year later, in 1947, she appeared in what would become one of the most beloved Christmas films in cinematic history, playing the doubting young girl at the center of Miracle on 34th Street alongside Maureen O'Hara. She was 8 years old and already captivating audiences in ways that most performers spend entire careers chasing. The transition from child star to serious actress is one of Hollywood's most treacherous passages, and history is littered with careers that collapsed in the crossing. Natalie Wood navigated it with remarkable instinct. By 1955, she had landed opposite James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, a role that earned her first Academy Award nomination and announced her arrival as a genuine, dramatic force. The transformation was complete. She was no longer a precocious child charming audiences. She was an actress capable of holding the emotional weight of a scene alongside the most electric screen presence of a generation. What followed was a career defined by range and ambition. Her work in Splendor in the Grass in 1961, directed by Elia Kazan, earned her a second Academy Award nomination and cemented her status as one of Hollywood's premier dramatic actresses. That same year, she starred in West Side Story, the landmark musical that became one of the defining films of the decade. A third nomination came for Love with a Proper Stranger in 1963, making her the youngest actress at the time to receive 3 nominations before the age of 25. She also collected 3 Golden Globe Awards across her career, and her name on a marquee was considered one of the surest guarantees of audience interest in a generation defined by genuine movie stardom. Her personal life was considerably more complicated than her professional trajectory might suggest. She married actor Robert Wagner for the first time in December 1957, a romance that seemed to epitomize Golden Age Hollywood glamour. That marriage dissolved in 1962. She then married British film producer Richard Gregson in 1969, and together they welcomed a daughter, Natasha Gregson, on September 29, 1970. That marriage also ended in divorce in 1972. In what felt like a story designed for the movies, Natalie and Robert Wagner reunited and remarried that same year. Together, they welcomed a second daughter, Courtney Brooke Wagner, on March 9, 1974. For a period, the family seemed to have found its footing. 2 daughters, a beloved Hollywood home, a mother whose career was experiencing a quiet renewal as she prepared for her next project. Then, Thanksgiving weekend, 1981 arrived, and everything fell apart in a single night. A night on the water that changed everything. Moving from the heights of Natalie Wood's career to the events of November 1981 means confronting one of the most scrutinized and still unanswered mysteries in Hollywood history. What is certain is the framework of that weekend. Natalie, Robert Wagner, their yacht captain, Dennis Davern, and her Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken boarded the family yacht, Splendor, and traveled to Catalina Island for the Thanksgiving holiday. What happened during the late hours of November 28th and the early minutes of November 29th has never been definitively established. On the morning of November 29th, 1981, Natalie Wood's body was found floating in the Pacific Ocean off Catalina Island, dressed in a red down jacket, a flannel nightgown, and wool socks. She was 43 years old. The small inflatable dinghy from the Splendor had washed up on nearby rocks. Wood, who was famously terrified of dark water and could not swim, was gone. A 2-week investigation followed, and Chief Medical Examiner Thomas Noguchi ruled the death an accidental drowning, noting bruises on her body as consistent with a fall into the water. For nearly 30 years, that ruling stood, but the story refused to stay still. Yacht Captain Dennis Davern had given statements to investigators in 1981 that aligned with Wagner's version of events. Over time, however, Davern's account shifted significantly. By 2011, he was among the more than 700 people who signed a petition addressed to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, outlining what they considered serious flaws in the original investigation and calling for the case to be reopened. In a television interview, Davern admitted he had not been fully truthful in his original statements and described a heated argument between Natalie and Wagner on the night she disappeared. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department agreed the new information was substantial enough to justify a fresh look. The reopened investigation produced significant developments. In 2012, the Los Angeles County coroner amended Wood's death certificate, changing the cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, and revised the manner of death to undetermined. A supplemental autopsy report drew particular attention to a series of bruises found on Wood's forearm, wrist, knee, and face, describing these injuries as not necessarily consistent with a simple accidental fall. The original investigation, investigators acknowledged, had not fully accounted for the physical evidence on her body. By 2018, the investigation had reached what many considered its most significant public moment. In a CBS News 48 Hours interview, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Lieutenant John Corina named Robert Wagner as a person of interest in Wood's death. As we've investigated the case over the last 6 years, I think he's more of a person of interest now, Corina stated. We know now that he was the last person to be with Natalie before she disappeared. Detective Ralph Hernandez added that the fresh bruising found on Wood's body made her appear to be the victim of an assault. Wagner had refused to speak with investigators since the case was reopened, and his version of events, Corina noted, did not align with those of other witnesses. No criminal charges were ever filed. Wagner has consistently denied any wrongdoing. In his 2009 memoir, he described the night as a tragic accident, suggesting Natalie likely slipped into the water while trying to secure the dinghy. Christopher Walken, who was present on the yacht that night, cooperated with investigators when the case was reopened and was not named a person of interest. New witnesses who emerged during the reinvestigation reported hearing a woman screaming from the direction of the yacht in the late hours of November 28th, adding fresh texture to a narrative that had never fully hardened into settled fact. By 2022, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department signaled it had exhausted available leads, moving the matter to cold case status while keeping the file technically open should credible new information emerge. Wagner was no longer described as a person of interest. The case, officially, remained unresolved, settling into that uncomfortable space between suspicion and certainty where it sits today. What cannot be argued is the human cost of a night that left two young girls without their mother. With that weight in mind, it is time to look at the lives those daughters built from the ruins of that loss. Natasha Gregson Wagner, the daughter who chose to remember out loud. Natasha Gregson Wagner, now 55, was 11 years old on the night her mother disappeared from the splendor. She has described the loss as the defining moment of her life, a wound so immediate and total that for many years she could not bring herself to examine the specific circumstances of her mother's death. The grief was simply too large to approach directly. Instead, she held on to fragments: the sound of her mother's laugh, the warmth of her presence, the feeling of being loved unconditionally by someone who was, in the truest sense, larger than life. After Natalie's death, Richard Gregson, Natasha's biological father, agreed with Robert Wagner that it was best for Natasha to remain in Wagner's household alongside her half-sisters Courtney and Katie. Wagner legally adopted Natasha, and she began calling him Daddy Wagner, a nickname that has stayed with her into adulthood. She has spoken about Wagner with consistent warmth and devotion, describing him as her protector, her wisest counsel, and one of the great loves of her life. The blended family that emerged from tragedy became, by Natasha's account, a genuine source of stability and love. Her professional path followed her mother's footsteps into acting. She dropped out of college in the early 1990s to pursue roles, appearing in films including Lost Highway, Another Day in Paradise, Urban Legend, and High Fidelity, as well as recurring roles in television series such as The 4400 CSI and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In all, she built a career spanning more than 60 film and television credits, carrying her mother's surname and her own identity simultaneously through an industry that never quite allowed her to forget whose daughter she was. In 2012, Natasha welcomed a daughter, Clover Clementine Watson, with actor Barry Watson, naming the baby in part as a tribute to her mother's 1965 film Inside Daisy Clover. She and Watson married in 2014, and the family of three has remained close with Robert Wagner and his wife Jill St. John. As recently as December 2025, Wagner shared photographs of himself spending the holidays with Natasha and her family, captioning one post with warmth about the joy they bring to his life. Natasha responded with equal affection, calling him her soft landing and praising the decades she has been lucky enough to share with him. Clover, now 14, is Natalie Wood's only grandchild, and in a beautiful echo of family history, her name was drawn from her grandmother's filmography. In 2020, Natasha stepped forward in a more deliberate way to reclaim the narrative around her mother's life. She produced and appeared in the HBO documentary Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, directed by Laurent Bouzereau, which focused not on the circumstances of the death, but on the richness of the life. Natasha also published the memoir More Than Love, an intimate portrait of my mother, Natalie Wood, giving readers access to private family photographs, memories, and reflections on what it meant to grow up as Natalie Wood's daughter. The book's emotional core was the question of where the mother ended and the child began. For someone who had spent so many years in grief, speaking publicly about her mother became a form of healing. Natasha has been unwavering in her defense of Robert Wagner throughout the years of renewed investigation. When Wagner was named a person of interest in 2018, Natasha released a statement describing the characterization as outrageous, maintaining that she knew Wagner to be incapable of hurting her mother. For Natasha, the investigative questions and the personal knowledge of the man who raised her existed in entirely separate registers. Now in her mid-50s, she continues to honor her mother's legacy through the fragrance line Natalie, which she launched in 2016 based on her mother's signature gardenia scent, extending the act of memory into something tangible. "I love the idea of bottling a memory," she has said. And in that one sentence, the depth of her devotion to her mother's story comes fully into focus. Courtney Wagner, a private life built from public loss. Whereas Natasha chose to step into the light and speak openly about her mother's life and legacy, her younger half-sister Courtney Wagner has largely moved through the world in the opposite direction. Born on March 9, 1974, Courtney was only 7 years old when Natalie died. Unlike Natasha, who carried at least a few years of conscious memory of their mother, Courtney was left with fragments so small they barely held shape. She has said publicly that she does not remember much about her mother beyond specific sensory details: the sound of her laugh, the smell that surrounded her, the specific quality of her hands. These are the impressions of a very young child, gathered before grief had a name. Courtney grew up in Robert Wagner's household alongside Natasha and her stepsister Katie Wagner, and the three girls became central to Wagner's ability to rebuild his life after Natalie's death. Wagner has spoken in interviews about the role his children played in keeping him functional in those first devastating months. The children, by most accounts, held one another together in ways that adults around them could only partially provide. That early foundation of shared grief became the bedrock of lifelong sibling loyalty. In contrast to Natasha's visible acting career, Courtney stepped far back from the entertainment industry. She has made only occasional public appearances, primarily in documentary contexts relating to her mother's life. Her most significant appearance came in the 2020 HBO documentary Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, where she offered reflections on what it meant to grow up without her mother and to carry that loss into adulthood. Her presence in that film gave many viewers their first real glimpse of the woman behind the famous name, someone who seemed thoughtful, measured, and deeply familiar with grief without being defined by it. Courtney's personal life was marked by genuine difficulty. She struggled with substance addiction during earlier years of her adult life, a battle that became public during a 2012 incident. Natasha spoke about her sister during this period with deep affection and respect, describing Courtney as someone who lives in the truth and has found a place of compassion and forgiveness for herself, noting that she is not ashamed of her struggles. Courtney later achieved sobriety, and those who know her have described her recovery as genuine and durable. She married Leif Lewis in 2007, and the couple welcomed a son, Riley John Wagner Lewis, born in September 2006. Riley is now approaching his 20s and has been raised largely outside the public eye, a deliberate choice that reflects Courtney's broader approach to privacy. Where her mother spent her entire life under studio lights, Courtney has consistently chosen the quieter rooms. Every so often, a photograph of her surfaces publicly, and the reaction is always the same. Observers remark on how powerfully she resembles Natalie Wood. The expressive features, the elegance of bearing, the quality of presence that made her mother so magnetic on screen, all of it echoed in a face that belongs to someone who has chosen not to perform. Both daughters have stood firmly behind Robert Wagner throughout years of public scrutiny. Courtney told People magazine in 2020 that her family experienced a true and collective tragedy together, and that finding ways to move forward had depended entirely on having one another. The language was careful and loving, describing not a family that escaped trauma, but one that walked through it together and survived. For Courtney, that survival has meant choosing a life that honors her mother's memory without being consumed by the public fascination surrounding the circumstances of her death. As of 2026, she continues to live privately, connected to Hollywood through family history rather than professional engagement. The two daughters of Natalie Wood occupy their mother's legacy differently. One has stepped forward to tend it publicly, the other tends it quietly from within. Both carry the same loss. Both chose love over bitterness, and in doing so, Both have honored a woman who was, by every account that matters, a mother first and a movie star second. Thank you for watching. If you have been watching till this point, you are the real MVPs of this channel. I want to thank you so much for supporting us. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about this story. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and we will see you in the next one.